This episode is brought to you by the ultimate fitness and weight loss program, The Body You Deserve. Do you constantly struggle to lose a few pounds only to gain them back immediately? It's one of the most frustrating things about diets. Maybe you have a little luck at first, shed a few pounds, fit into your skinny jeans. But eventually you realize that jar of green juice and those 5 little macrobiotic meals you're eating a day is not a sustainable way to live. And before you know it, you're back to square one. It happens to the best of us. We all know Tony Robbins as someone who's in absolute peak shape. It's how he's able to keep up with his schedule and stay on stage for 16 hours a day, 5 days in a row. And he does that over and over and over again throughout the year. But Tony's experienced the exact same frustrations as you when it comes to health and body weight. There was a point in time where he fell into the vicious cycle of emotional eating and overeating. But he knew he had to change the way food made him feel, to mentally condition himself so his relationship with food would be healthy and sustainable. That's how Tony lost 30 pounds in 38 days and gained a new mindset that keeps him motivated even today. It's these core principles and strategies that form the foundation for the body you deserve. In this program, Tony Robbins and Dr. Nate Booth guide you through a 10-day process to help you train your body to burn fat. Learn how extreme low-calorie diets cause your body to store fat and gain more weight. Even if you've spent years struggling to create healthy patterns for yourself, Tony and Nate will teach you step by step what it takes to make healthy choices on a daily basis, once and for all. After 10 days, you'll begin to see and feel a remarkable difference in your physical and mental well-being as your body sheds off those unwanted pounds. Achieve the health and fitness results you've always wanted with this risk-free opportunity. Go to www.tonyrobbins.com/bodyyoudeserve right now and get 25% off this amazing weight loss program. This offer is only good until March 4th, so make the decision right now to make a change and achieve the health and fitness you've always wanted. Think back to a time when you felt unstoppable, when you were in peak physical shape. How did it feel to have that kind of energy? What did it feel like to be on top of your game? And what if I told you that you could feel like that every single day? Hey guys, it's Yoerg, editorial director for Robbins Research International. In this episode of the Tony Robbins Podcast, we're doing a deep dive into something that's on all our minds this time of year, our bodies. Or more precisely, what we're feeding our bodies and how that impacts our health. Joining us for this episode is renowned medical expert Dr. Mark Hyman. Dr. Hyman is a practicing family physician, a 10-time #1 New York Times bestselling author, and an internationally recognized leader, speaker, educator, and advocate in his field. We've also been really lucky to have him as a guest speaker at Tony's Unleash the Power Within event. Dr. Hyman is the director at the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, and he's also the founder and medical director of the Ultra Wellness Center, which has a 30,000-person waiting list. You may already have read some of his works. His books include The 10-Day Detox Diet, Eat Fat, Get Thin, and The Blood Sugar Solution. He's also a medical editor at the Huffington Post, and he's been featured on CBS This Morning, The Today Show, Good Morning America, CNN, The View, and The Dr. Oz Show. Dr. Hyman also just released a new docuseries. It's called Broken Brain, premiered in October, and it will be available again on January 17th, 2018. To watch it, go to brokenbrain.com. In this podcast, Dr. Hyman and I discuss the foundation of functional medicine and why it's time to stop treating symptoms and start addressing the underlying causes of our health concerns. We talk about the dynamic factors that impact our brains, why you don't have to wait for the future to start optimizing your health and increasing your performance, as well as maximizing your brain function and reducing disease. You can do this right now, every single day. And here's the thing, even if you feel good right now, this episode will help you learn how to start feeling great so that you can get out there and perform at your absolute best. Mark, welcome to the Tony Robbins Podcast. It is so great to have you.
I'm so glad to be here.
So one thing that I wanted to, explain to everyone before we get into the interview, for full disclosure, I personally am on your 10-day detox right now.
Right now? Oh.
Right this second. Yeah, this is not coffee, this is tea. And
I'm on day 6 and it's going great. And I would love it if, I think that's one thing that, before we get into the bulk of the interview, I was wondering if you could explain to people a little bit of the principles of the 10-day detox.
I've been a functional medicine practitioner for 20 years, and the main drug we use is food. And I've used various types of food programs to treat various conditions. One of the biggest drivers of disease is inflammation, and a lot of that comes from the gut. And so this program that I developed, the 10-day detox, is really derived out of the work I've done with patients and was very successful, which is essentially putting in all these amazing foods that are healing and reparative, detoxifying, anti-inflammatory, and removing the foods that are harmful, things that are inflammatory and allergenic and processed in any way, and basically taking on all the drugs and addictive foods like sugar, alcohol, caffeine for a short period of time, because most people don't get the chance to see what happens when they hit the reset button. It's like a lot of their software and it's just all got bugs in it, and your operating system isn't running at full speed. It's like when you get a new computer, it just screams, and after a while it just gets kind of clunky. And I think that's what happens to our biology. And so this is like a reboot. And it works pretty profoundly by eliminating all these inflammatory foods, processed food, sugar, grains, gluten, dairy is the big ones, and adding in tons of fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, really clean animal protein, and a lot of good fats. I don't really discuss this in the book, but it's really designed to focus on sugar addiction, but it really also works for autoimmune disease, gut issues, as well as weight and diabetes. And we've had people come off huge amounts of drugs using this. In fact, one patient came off like 100 units of insulin and reversed their diabetes. One patient said, within 3 days, she got off 52 units of insulin. So it has profound effects, and it's by taking out the high sugar glycemic foods, which drives so much age-related disease, and it's adding in a lot of fats. It's 50% fat. I don't advertise it as that, but that's what shuts off the cravings, the hunger, makes you more balanced, more equilibrium instead of swings up and down all day. And it's very, very powerful. And I think the reason I created it was I don't think people make the connection between what they eat and how they feel, between their habits and their sense of well-being or their diseases. They think, oh, it's normal to be stuffy and congested. It's normal to have bloating and gas. It's normal to have occasional headaches or joint pain, or I have eczema, or whatever it is, acne. I mean, these things just often go away in 10 days. We had 1,000 people do it, and we have people fill out a list of symptoms and score them like 1 to 4, and we can tell, what your score is. I call it the FLC score. That's when you feel like crap. And basically, we see numbers come down 62% in all people in 10 days. Like, there's no drug on the planet that can reduce symptoms from all diseases by 62% in 10 days. And the reason it works is because food is such a powerful regulator of our biology, and we really have never made that connection before. So 10 days, people can stop it, they can go back to doing whatever they want, I don't care, but it gives them the opportunity to go, oh, geez, like what I was feeling is related to what I was eating. And now I have a choice. I can either like the pizza so much I want to go back and eat pizza and feel like crap, or I might want to feel better and have more energy and sleep better and not have all these symptoms and be more present and my mind clear. I'm not in brain fog. I mean, these are all things that are available to me now that I didn't know were available.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that too, because I think a lot of people would think, well, I don't have a disease or I feel fine. And what they have to realize too is that it's not okay to just feel fine every day. You should feel good every day. You should feel great.
Yeah.
And that's something that I actually saw an interesting parallel with a lot of the people who attend Tony Robbins events, because people don't go to Tony Robbins events because they feel broken, because they feel like there's something that has to be fixed, right? They go because they're already operating at a pretty high level, but they just want to take it up a level, right?
Yeah.
So they're achieving so much and they want to achieve more.
It's all about wanting high performance, right?
Exactly. Yep. So, and I love also that it's very sustainable. There are some people actually at our office who are doing it, and I said, oh, how is it? They're like, oh, I don't even know. Did it end? Like, I started it a month ago. I'm still kind of on it. Yeah.
Right.
So,
well, once you go, like I feel good. And the problem with most people is it's sort of like the frog in boiling water. If you put a frog in cold water, you turn the heat up, they'll boil to death. But if you throw it in boiling water, it'll jump right out. So most of us have slowly had this creep of not feeling good. And we think that's our new normal. And I want people to understand it's not your new normal. I mean, I had one patient say to me, Dr. Hyman, I didn't know I was feeling so bad until I started feeling so good. I thought this was what I felt like.
Yep. No, that perfectly sums it up. And I would, invite everybody listening to think back to a time when you felt really productive, really energetic. I mean, really, there's no better way of saying it, just really on. Like you were just on your game, right? Mm-hmm. And think back to that time and think about what you were eating. Think about, how active you were. Think about what situation you were in. And, I can pretty much guarantee you that you probably were putting good things in your body and not bad things. And everybody can think back to a time when they had one of those moments or those periods of their life. And who doesn't want to be like that all the time?
It's available to you. That's the point.
Yep. So I wanted to ask you, just because I think a lot of our audience may not be familiar with the term functional medicine. So I would love it if you could explain that and sort of how you got involved in it. And you've been in it, you say now, for 20 years.
Yeah, well, it's the opposite of dysfunctional medicine, which is kind of what we have, right?
Yep.
And it's a new way of thinking about disease. So the best way I can explain it is that, we used to think the earth was flat until we didn't, right? We used to think that the earth was the center of the universe until Galileo said, hey guys, ain't that way. We used to think that species just showed up, an elephant just showed up as an elephant on the planet. But we now know that species evolve, right, and transform. And I think that these are massive paradigm shifts. People are still arguing about evolution in Darwin 150 years later, and it's very hard for people to shift. And medicine's the same way. Our whole notion of diseases has completely transformed. So let me give you an example. We now have heard a lot of talk about the microbiome, which are all the bacteria and the whole ecosystem of bugs that live in your gut. And those now are linked to weight gain and diabetes, to heart attacks, to cancer, to Alzheimer's, to autism, to autoimmune disease, to allergies, to asthma, to depression. So how does that even make sense that all these different, quote, diseases can be influenced by something in the gut, right? Well, it doesn't make sense. Like when you go to the cardiologist, well, tell me about your gut flora. Or when you go to the rheumatologist, they don't go, tell me about your gut flora. These are completely absent from our practice, and yet this is what the science is showing. So the science changes far faster than the practice. And the science says the body is not made up of all these organs and all these specialties. It's actually a system. It's a dynamic ecosystem. And so rather than treating the symptoms, we treat the whole system. Rather than treating the disease, it's sort of like an organic farmer. They're soil farmers. They're not plant farmers. Whereas industrial agriculture plants corn and then pours all these chemicals on to keep off weeds and keep off pests and to fertilize the soil, and because the soil's depleted and the whole ecosystem's messed up, right? Whereas if you have an organic farmer and a complex ecosystem of plants, is a whole different scenario. So sure. we focus on creating a healthy soil so disease can't arise. We don't really treat diseases at all. We don't treat symptoms. We really treat the system by taking away the bad stuff, putting in the good stuff. Just like the 10-day detox diet, take out the bad stuff, put in the good stuff. The body has an amazing capacity to regenerate, heal, repair, renew, revitalize at any age. At any age. I mean, I've seen people with dementia who now are better, and it's striking to see that you can have such a horrible, end stage problem, and yet using this approach really works. So functional medicine is really about the why, not the what. When someone comes and says, well, I have rheumatoid arthritis, that's what you have. It's not why you have it. It just tells you that you share things in common with a group of people who have this kind of joint pain. It looks like this, the lab tests show this, but it doesn't tell you why do you have rheumatoid arthritis. Is it heavy metal toxicity? Is it gut flora problems? Is it gluten? Is it an infection with Lyme disease? Like, it doesn't give you any insight. So functional medicine is sort of a navigational tool. It's sort of a GPS system for the new science. It allows us to navigate this landscape in disease in a very different way by asking why, not what, and by understanding the root causes so we actually can help remove those causes and then say, what is the science of creating health? Functional medicine is really about science of creating health. When I was at medical school, I didn't go to a class that said Creating Health 101. Like, that was not a class, right?
Right.
It was pathology and pathophysiology. And
yep.
I'm like, doctors have no clue. Say, well, I'm feeling good, but I want to get healthier. And I just saw one of the number one athletes in the world. I mean, he's good. Like, he's better than 98%, but he wants that extra 2%. Well, I know how to help him with that.
Yeah.
A regular doctor would go, you're great, you don't, or I saw some guy yesterday, it was a 40-year-old opera singer from New York, this man, and he was diagnosed with MS. And their response to him was, well, it's not bad enough yet to put you on medication, so let's wait till it's bad enough, and then I'll give you medication. And I'm like, what? That doesn't make sense. It's like, oh, your blood sugar's a little high, but it's not quite diabetes. So when you get diabetes, then come back and we got medication for you.
Yep.
That's the opposite of what functional medicine is.
Yeah. What's interesting is a lot of Tony Robbins clients and the audience of this podcast are business owners.
Yeah.
And as we were talking, I'm thinking, this doesn't make sense. If you were a business owner, if your body was your business and you didn't hit your Q3 or your Q4 goals, that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
You don't think, okay, let's figure out what Band-Aid we can slap on that. You think, why? Why are we not hitting our goals? Let's go back and look at the root of the problem and then fix that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, I saw a guy yesterday who was, ran this huge investment firm, very smart guy, made tons of money, very successful. And I said, listen, the amount of time that you focus on optimizing your environment so you can create health and providing some basic, simple planning and, forecasting basically, is like zero. Like he just shows up, wakes up in the morning and doesn't think about what's he going to eat, how's he going to exercise. I mean, just like simple things that he could do, but it's not an area that we focus on. We think, oh, it's just going to happen. No, it doesn't happen. You have to design your life to create health. And it's not that much time or that much work. It's just building the structure and the systems and the processes so you can do it. I go travel a lot. I travel 50% of the time. I put a jump rope in my bag. I have my yoga clothes. I can go to any class. Thank God there's Yelp now. I can type in yoga in any city and find something near me. It's not that hard. I go, restaurants and I can pick the restaurants, or it's not that hard. In fact, my wife was in San Diego and she was teaching and hosting this big conference, and the food at the hotel was terrible. And I was over in New York, and I basically just went on Postmates, which is an app that, basically is like Uber for restaurants. And you just go on there, order stuff on the menu, you hit the button, and the car delivers the food to wherever you want. And it's not that hard these days to actually design your life. It just takes some planning and forethought and thinking.
Sure. And then knowledge, education, right? So you have to know how to read menus. You have to know what the good stuff is, what the bad stuff is. And that's where I'm sort of wondering this, it seems like common sense, but this is something that it feels that maybe not a lot of us, we maybe grew up with it or kind of forgot it or ignored it. And I'm sort of wondering why is functional medicine such a recent thing? I mean, you have a great quote in your book. It's from, I cannot pronounce his name, but the guy who isolated vitamin C, the Nobel laureate.
Albert Szent-Györgyi.
Yes.
Discovery consists not in seeing what everybody else thought, but seeing what they thought and thinking something different, right?
Exactly, right. So it's interesting because you're thinking, science has been progressing for years, and there's study after study after study, and people have been studying obviously medicine, but why is this so new? Why is this something that's
it's not new. It's ancient. I mean,
yeah, it is ancient. But why is there like this renewed interest and people are believing and following?
I think two things are happening. One is the era of medicine as this sacred science that is inviolable and true and will save us from everything is over. I mean, you just have to look at the numbers, right? We're 54th in life expectancy. We spend more than twice any other nation, probably far more than most, 20% of our GDP for healthcare, 84% of that's for chronic disease. It's bankrupting our system. We're seeing dramatic increase in obesity, type 2 diabetes. We're failing. We're failing massively. And the reason is we developed an acute care healthcare system, which is great for broken bones. I broke my arm last year. Awesome. Thank God there's a helicopter. Take me to the hospital, get x-rays, fix it up, but we don't have a system for chronic disease. So we are trying to apply a chronic disease model, an acute care model, which is take a drug, right? If you have a pneumonia, take penicillin. Awesome, right? But diabetes isn't like pneumonia. It's not a single disease caused by a single drug with a single outcome.
Sure.
So all of a sudden people are sort of seeing the emperor has no clothes. And they're realizing that, what we've learned isn't actually true, and that what their doctor's telling them isn't true. And then, of course, the advent of the internet and Dr. Google, everybody has access to information that they didn't have before. So they can be much more experienced consumers, and they're asking questions or thinking about things. They're challenging their practitioners. And then, of course, the science has shifted. So now we understand that, for example, brain science has shifted in the last 20 years dramatically. We used to think the brain was fixed. You got a certain number of brain cells, that's it. It declines as you get older. But we know now you can create new brain cells at any age. You can create new connections at any age, that the body has enormous reparative, regenerative capacity. Stem cells are emerging, which work in a very different way than drugs. They simply go to where the body needs help and helps renew and repair the body. So that's really what functional medicine is. It's just sort of the science of understanding this new systems biology and understanding how to apply it and make it real for people.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit more about brain health, because that's something that a lot of people are very interested in these days, and how to achieve peak performance in your brain. But I'd love to start with sort of understanding the connection between our mind and our body. So this is something that a lot of people, it seems obvious, right?
Yeah.
But I was wondering if you could sort of get into, in particular, the gut-brain connection. So how does that interconnectedness work?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So the brain, I personally figured out all this stuff about functional medicine 20 years ago because I got a broken brain, basically. I ended up living in China, working there, developing clinics for expatriates, got exposed to huge amounts of mercury, came home, and my system collapsed. I got chronic fatigue syndrome. I couldn't sleep. I was depressed. I couldn't think. I couldn't remember anything. I couldn't focus. It was like I had dementia, ADD, and depression all at once. And I just couldn't operate. My muscles hurt, my gut was a mess, my brain was not working. And it was through unwinding that I figured out how to fix things, which wasn't by treating my brain, it's by treating my body. And I realized that I started applying this with patients. And I learned it almost by accident. I call myself the accidental psychiatrist because I would treat people with allergies or gut issues and their depression would go away. Or I'd treat someone with heavy metal poisoning and their dementia would go away. Or I'd treat someone with, another patient with depression and they also had, gluten intolerance and they would get better. Or they had blood sugar swings and and I would go, wait a minute. The body is affecting the brain. So we know about the mind-body connection, which is how stress and our beliefs and our thoughts and our attitudes affect our biology. And Tony does a great job of explaining that. But the other is also true, that it's bidirectional, that the body-mind effect, which is how our body affects our mind, is equally as important. And we just finished producing an 8-part docuseries that's coming out online on the brain called The Broken Brain. And it goes through all this in great detail with interviews with over 40 experts. And we dissect in modern science what is going on. I wrote this book, Ultra Mind Solution, over 10 years ago, which was so far ahead of its time. And I talked about these things that people are just now coming to the forefront. And so I think the brain is responsive to anything and everything that we do, right? What we eat, how much we exercise, how much we sleep, the quality of our sleep, the stress levels, our nutrient levels, environmental toxins, our gut flora, infections, everything, allergens, all this stuff affects our brain, our hormone levels. So by understanding the dynamic factors, and this is what functional medicine is, what are the dynamic factors either that are injuring the brain, and how do you identify them and get rid of them? And how do you then fix them? I mean, I had a guy the other day, it was a classic story. He was 61 years old, early dementia, didn't remember his wife, couldn't really barely carry on a conversation, nonetheless a coherent conversation, couldn't read a clock for 5 years, and was so sad. He was 61 years old.
60s,
and he saw the neurologist at Harvard, expert in memory, says, sorry guy, this is your end of your road, get your affairs in order and just spend as much time with your family as you can. And they, thank God, the wife didn't sit for that. Did
not accept that, yeah.
Yeah, so they came to see me and I'm like, listen, I don't know if I can help you, but let's just follow these principles and let's see what we find. So we started digging, sort of like going on a targeted hunt for those targeted factors. We found he had high levels of mercury. He had 3 different tick infections that were affecting his brain, Lyme disease, Ehrlichia, something else. And he had high levels of mold in his environment, and he was very high sugar diet, which was causing inflammation in the brain. We know type 3 diabetes are calling Alzheimer's now. He had a bunch of nutritional deficiencies. Everything was out of whack, and we just started working on it. and we treated his tick infections. We got getting rid of the mercury. We got him off sugar and on a ketogenic diet. We optimized his nutritional status. He came back 8 months later, and I was like, oh my God, he was completely verbal. He could read a clock. He never was forgetting his wife. He talked to his daughter, asked her about what she's doing and her friends, and remembered all kinds of stuff. He goes to the doctor, and he was completely zombie. Would go in. Now he knows, I got to bring my ID because I got to get through the gate and blah blah blah. So it was just stunning. The wife gave me a bottle of wine, saying thanks for giving my husband back. And I think we hear these stories, go, oh my God, that's like an anecdote, or it's 1 in a million. No, this is what we do every day. If you have the right roadmap, if I give you a map for New Delhi and I drop you in New York, you're kind of screwed. Yeah. And the problem is, we have the wrong map for disease. Functional medicine is basically in 2017 the best approximation of the new landscape of disease as we know it. And so when we apply that to the brain, it's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah. So you mentioned this guy, he had a bunch of things, or he was exposed to a bunch of things that a lot of average people may not. What are some neurotoxins? What are some ways that, so you can say toxins or things that trigger inflammation, right? Sure. What are some of the common everyday things that people don't think about that could be essentially damaging your brain?
Sure. So by the way, all the things I'm going to say are true for every disease. And whether someone gets, rheumatoid arthritis or dementia or diabetes or cancer depends on them and their unique genetics. Sure. But the same insults influence all these chronic disease processes. So I saw this patient who had a follow-up this morning who came into me, a few weeks ago with dementia. And it turned out he had a whole bunch of stuff that we found that we were looking for. And we found, the insults to his brain were many. He had tick infections. He also had Lyme, and he had Babesia and Ehrlichia. He also had mold that he was exposed to because he lived in Florida in moldy buildings. These are things that most people don't look for. He had some heavy metals. For example, he had fillings in his teeth, and the inorganic mercury was being released, and we measured that, and we could see that, and he wasn't detoxifying it. We found he had diabetes he didn't know he had, which affects his brain. That's another toxin. Sugar is probably the most significant and abundant toxin. We consume about 152 pounds a year per person. That's ridiculous. I mean, the average American has 44 gallons of soda a year, and that's not including sugar-sweetened beverages like sports drinks, energy drinks, and sugar drinks, teas, and vitamin water, or whatever. This is a potent a little sugar's fine, but like a pharmacologic dose, no, right? The dose makes the poison here. And then we find he has all these insults, and these things, whether they're toxins, allergens. He also had gluten reactions that affect the brain. He had a leaky brain, a leaky gut, and these were all causing... He was a mess. But again, this is what we see over and over in most patients who are chronically ill, regardless of the issue. And so we just have to optimize, get rid of the toxic load from the infections, get rid of the metals, get rid of the mold in his environment and help him detoxify. Then he was very low in testosterone, which is an incredible trophic factor or growth factor for the brain. He was very low in thyroid, which no one had diagnosed him with, which is important for your metabolism and for your brain function and memory, energy. He had very, very low vitamin D, which regulates so many functions in the brain. Yeah. So my job was just to give him a tune-up, get rid of the bad stuff, put in the good stuff, give him testosterone, give him thyroid, give him vitamin D, give him B vitamin. He had some real issues with B12 and folate and B6, all of which affect the brain. So often it's not one thing. Mm-hmm. I remember years ago when I started doing this, I had a patient who had seen at Harvard. He had memory issues. The testing was abnormal. He had SPECT scans showing low blood flow in his brain. And I was like, well, let's try this. I don't know if it's going to work. And a year later, we went back and all the same tests, and they were all better. And I'm like, called the neurologist, and I'm like, how does this happen? I don't know what I'm doing here, but it's worked. And the neurologist was like, yeah, the brain is resilient. And when you take away all the bad stuff and put in the good stuff, it can repair. Yeah. And I was like, wow,
Yeah. So all the patients you've mentioned so far have been a little bit older, and I think that's really interesting for our audience because I think what people are so scared of is loss of cognitive function, especially as they get older. I mean, our fastest growing population segment, right, entering their 70s and 80s, and Alzheimer's and dementia, and I think everybody is just scared of that. Yeah. But that is something, and you mentioned they had a build up over time, as you did when you had your breakdown in China, over decades and decades of problems, right, that we're building up. What about children?
Yeah, what about
Because,
children?
yeah, autism. These are all things that people are so concerned about now. And children are, you mentioned resilient. We always say children are so resilient, and so I think we tend to, sort of pass that by. But this is definitely a huge, issue that's affecting millions of parents.
It's true. I mean, I wrote a article a number of years ago talking about the parallels between Alzheimer's and autism. And the two patients I had this morning, one was dementia and one was autism. So I treat people across the spectrum, and little kids with all sorts of issues. Now, the good thing about little kids is they're really resilient. And if you really help them, they can get better. And this little girl this morning, she had very high levels of lead. She had, very, very, very high levels of lead, which was sort of striking to me.
From what?
It's unclear. I mean, lead can come from leaded paint, can come from water, can come from the soil, if you live in an industrial area, from cement plants, power plants, coal plants, medical incinerators. It can come from the leaded crystal, if people use crystal. It can come from glazed plates, if people use like fancy Italian French plates. I once went to a store to buy some wine glasses, and one glass was $5 and then was $50. I'm like, $50 for a wine glass? And the guy goes, yeah, it's like Rydell crystal. I'm like, oh. He goes, yeah, the lead in it makes the wine taste better.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, oh, okay. You won't remember that it tastes better, but that's okay,
Oh, man.
Yeah. So pretty interesting. So these kids have all the same issues. They have inflammation, they have gut issues, they have mitochondrial issues, they have toxic overload, they have methylation, nutritional issues, detoxification issues. These are the common patterns. And it doesn't matter what disease you have, you apply this model and you just find the thing that's unique to them, because everybody's different, right?
Yep.
No two people are the same. We call this personalized medicine, precision medicine. Mostly what that means out there in the public eye is find the drug that matches you and your genetics and disease. That's okay, great, better effectiveness, lower side effects, but it's just like a tip of the iceberg about what's really true. And I'm hosting a panel at the Medical Innovation Summit at Cleveland Clinic next month, and we're having a number of experts on what we call nutrigenomics, which is how nutrition, both macronutrients, protein, fat, carbs, and phytonutrients, which are the chemicals in plant foods, and vitamins and minerals, affect our gene expression and turn on or off genes that create disease or health. And we know how this works. And I've been writing about this for over a decade. I'm so funny. I got a couple articles that were published about this, and one was a few years ago. And I'm reading the article, and there was like a quote from me from like 10 years ago. I'm like, why are they quoting me? I'm not an expert. I was just writing about it. And I was like,
well, everyone's so interested now with CRISPR and gene editing, and
everybody
wants to kind of maximize their DNA. But
yeah, I mean, we don't have to wait for the future. Is what I'm telling you right now. To optimize your health, to increase performance, to maximize your brain function, to reduce your disease burden, to prevent disease in the future. We have so much science and technology that allows us to do that. It's only going to get better, but I think it's not like a future thing. I mean, I do this every day at the Ultra Wellness Center here in Massachusetts at my practice and at Cleveland Clinic, although we have 3,000 people on the waiting list there. So,
Yep. So following up on the kid question, because I think a lot of parents too, sometimes they'll have children that have, they might just say they're just being teenagers, but sort of the beginnings of, say, like depression or anxiety, right? Because they're overloaded with everything. And you mentioned in the book that, some people would say, okay, well, psychology, right? Like, what about therapy?
Yeah.
But you say that only 10% of us are actually nutritionally, metabolically, and biochemically balanced enough to fully benefit from that, right? So what would you recommend for parents who have kids, maybe before putting them into therapy, taking a good hard look at their environment and their diet?
Huge,
but how do you sort of socialize that, especially with teenagers?
Yeah, it's huge. It's a problem because teenagers, adolescence is a time of temporary psychosis. So it's,
where you think you're invincible and nothing matters.
Yeah. And, everything your parents say doesn't matter. And it's like, So I think decision choices are difficult. But what I would say is that, we know that diet plays such a huge role in the brain, and taking it to the extreme, in terms of behavior issues and mood issues. Gave a presentation last week, and it was talking about this whole idea of food injustice and how we know that, for example, high levels of omega-6 fats from soybean oil and low levels of omega-3 fats, which, by the way, is pretty much if you eat a processed diet in America, if you live in a food desert, or if you live, like most Americans, you're eating high amounts of these refined vegetable oils, which are very inflammatory, and low levels of omega-3s, which leads to depression, suicide, homicide, violence. Large studies have looked at this. And I looked at data on prisoners. If you look at prisoners, if you take people in prison and you feed them a different diet that's healthier, 54% reduction in violent crime. You add a vitamin to that, it's an 80% reduction in violent crime in the prison. And I had a person write me a handwritten letter from a prison saying, Dr. Hyman, I read your book in prison. I managed to follow your recommendations, and I noticed that my entire personality changed, my mood changed, my aggressiveness changed, and it was like I'm a violent criminal, but I think that was driven by the food I was eating. I mean, it's just heartbreaking to hear this. And kids, how do we have our kids learn and function when they're going to school on Doritos and Coke for breakfast, if they have anything? And I think it's criminal given what we know. And I think,
and their brains are still developing.
I mean, my daughter was a perfect example. She was in high school and did pretty well, but got very depressed. She got an NYU. She was, the summer after she graduated, she was just super depressed and couldn't get out of bed. And she really never listened to me. Like, don't eat this and like that. She went to this high school where I controlled her diet up until like 9th grade or 10th grade. And then she went to this high school where they had to be on the meal plan. They served them tons of bread and pasta and sugar and
chicken
dairy.
fingers and
and she gained like 20, 30 pounds, and it was just so swollen and inflamed. And I said, listen, we have 10 days before we have to leave to go to college. I said, if you really want to try this, do everything I say. So we went on a 10-day detox. We ran every day together. We made sure she slept, gave her some supplements and vitamins. Dramatic transformation. She went from being like in bed and depressed to losing a ton of weight, feeling good, having energy, not being depressed within just a few days. So, I think, we know that vitamin D causes depression if it's low. We know that folate, B12, magnesium, B6, zinc, all these lead to mood disorders and anxiety. I mean, if you're low in magnesium, you're anxious. Magnesium is a relaxation mineral. So we know scientifically how to deal with this. And sometimes insulin resistance causes the problem. I've seen teenagers on tons of drugs, and we get them cleaned up, we get them living in a wholesome environment, we get them changed. They can be completely transformed.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you say, you know how to solve the problem, you know how to treat the root of the problem. But the fact that, you also have a statistic, 1 in 10 Americans now takes an antidepressant.
Yeah, right? That's depressing.
And the use of antidepressants right? So I think for a lot of people, the first idea is, okay, well, what's the solution? An antidepressant. And they don't back up and think about, okay, well, let's, treat this in a more holistic way. So.
Yeah, depression is not a Prozac deficiency, right?
Right. You're not lacking in Prozac.
No, but it could be because you're eating gluten and it causes an autoimmune thyroid reaction. You have low thyroid. It could be because you've been eating bad diet and have acid reflux, like millions of Americans do, and they take acid blockers, which prevent you from absorbing B12, which causes depression, or it could be because you don't get enough sun and you're vitamin D deficient. It could be because you take an antibiotic, so it alters your gut flora. It could be because you eat a lot of sushi and are mercury poisoned, or hate fish and have omega-3 deficiency, or because you're pre-diabetic because you eat too much sugar and that causes depression. So you can have the same symptoms, right? But different diseases. And the problem with psychiatry is people are grouped according to their symptoms, not their causes. So depression is if you have these criteria or you have ADHD diffuse criteria, it tells you nothing about what's actually happening, right?
Right. Yep. So the whole idea of, and this will be the last question, by the way, and we can wrap up. I wanted to sort of leave our audience with some tactical tips, because you've mentioned a lot, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this thing that you're eating, you're not eating the rainbow diet, or it could be this exposure and you don't know. Now, obvious way to find the cause is to go see a functional medicine practitioner, right? And get some panels and figure out what's going on. But in the Ultramind solution, you do also mention there is a way that you can start eliminating. And I think a lot of people get overwhelmed, like, I don't want to eliminate everything, and how do I reintroduce? So what are some basic things that people can do just over the course of a month or two, just sort of DIY, trying to reduce the amount of, toxins and inflammation? And
I lay it out in the book. It's a 6-week plan. It's very straightforward. And, I had a patient come to see me once. It was like, feeling good. I'm like, why are you here? She says, well, I read your book and I had all these problems. I did the Ultramind solution and now everything's gone, but I just maybe have something to tell me. Like, it took me like 9 months to get in, so I figured I'd just do it and follow it. And, it even allows you to personalize it by actually figuring out if you have, let's say, vitamin D deficiency or magnesium, by questionnaires, because these are symptoms related to it. So essentially, it's just cleaning up your diet. It's getting rid of the bad stuff. So you can do the 10-day detox diet. That's a great, simple way to do it. Very powerful. And it gets rid of processed food. It gets rid of starch and sugar. Adds in a lot of good fats, lots of vegetables. I mean, it's real food, right? I always say if it has a label, probably not so good to eat it, right? It's like if it has a health claim on the label, it's probably worse. If it says whole grain or low fat or whatever, that's probably bad. So eat real food. Like Michael Pollan, eat food, not too much, mostly plants, right?
Mostly plants,
Yeah, so it's pretty common sense advice. But gluten and dairy are big allergens and inflammatory. I would definitely eliminate those. Processed foods, sugar, these are things that help body reset. Not forever, but just for a time being. And then exercise, super important. That, for example, rigorous exercise 3 times a week works as well or better than an antidepressant. We know that sleep is critical. Most of us are sleep deprived in this country. The quality of our sleep is poor. So having a sleep hygiene routine, all of us are on screens at night. There's blue light, which affects melatonin production in our pineal gland, so we can't sleep at night. So there's all sorts of simple things, exercise, sleep, eating. And these are really, really powerful tools. Meditation is also a great tool. So these are all self-care things that you can do for a short period of time. And then, of course, I would have most people take a basic brain-boosting supplement plan, which is essentially a multivitamin, fish oil, vitamin D, the B6 folate, B12 vitamins, sometimes magnesium. And it can be really powerful. And just that alone, most people can save all their money and not go see a doctor because, and then if there's stuff that doesn't get better, you go, well, I'm not better. Well, then it might be time to go find out, do you have metal poisoning? Do you have Lyme disease? Do you have a gut problem that needs to be fixed? Do you have some other bigger issue that you need something specialized for you? But most of the time, this is stuff that people can do themselves. And that's why I empower people to do it because my books are really not about sort of theoretical. This is really comes out of treating thousands and tens of thousands of patients and looking at the science and seeing the connections and actually designing an approach that people can do themselves. And it's so powerful. And then, you can realize that, gee, I'm not really a depressed person. Like I was just my biology, right?
Yep. Yeah, I would encourage everyone to try this because it might seem, I know a lot of people work really hard and want to spend a lot of time with their families and they want to do everything and they think I don't really have time to do this kind of self-care.
Yeah.
But actually there are 2 major benefits that I think a lot of people would see is the first is that, through osmosis, your family and the people around you will start eating better as well. So if you're cooking a dinner and you're, eating with your family, you might start seeing a difference because of that. The other big thing is at work. I know a lot of people have had, we've heard a lot of talk about brain fog and, feeling sluggish at work. And I know that, the most common thing I hear sometimes is, oh, I need a coffee. No, you don't need a coffee, right? You're just now built yourself up so that you do kind of need one to function. And the level of productivity and the amount of enthusiasm and energy that you'll bring to your career and your professional environment, I think is extraordinary. So I think those are 2 big benefits that everybody listening should be very aware of. That's something that it's not just about taking care of yourself. You're also going to help your family and your business.
Absolutely. I mean, we know if we have a fancy bike, we maintain it. We oil change. We make sure the tires are filled up and everything's lubricated. If we have a car, we take better care of our car. Make sure the tire pressure is good and the right fuel we use. I mean, what do we think we are? We're dynamic living organisms. We can't just put crap in there and feed it sugar and processed food and fast food and expect to actually thrive. Like it's sort of it's silly that we think that, right? I mean, this guy paid me all this money. He came in, he's drinking a bottle of wine every night and a scotch, and he wonders why he feels bad. I'm like,
Well,
you may be an alcoholic, but aside from that, this is probably making you feel bad. And, he's like, I'll take your money and see you later, But it's like, it's often so obvious. And when people take the time to stop and think and realize that they have to take care of this, and especially as we get older, it's more important because your body tends to break down. It's just the law of entropy, right? But people have old cars, old houses, and they can keep running and keep going if they maintain them and take care of them.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Hyman. That was a wonderful, wonderful interview. For everybody also who is attending Unleash the Power Within, Dr. Hyman also makes appearances on the day 4, which is Health Day. Gives a great presentation, gives you all the tools and strategies you need for everlasting health. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Tony Robbins Podcast is directed and hosted by Tony Robbins and Mary Buckheit. Anna Yoerg is our editorial director and occasional host. The podcast is produced by Carrie Song and Tyler Culbertson. Jamie Carvajal and Adriel De La Torre are our digital editors. Special thanks to Diane Adcock for her creative review. Copyright Robbins Research International.